The world was different now, unrecognizable from the one Serena had once known. Earth, once teeming with life and vibrant cities, had become a broken shadow of its former self. The sky, which had once been filled with planes and birds, now echoed only with the sound of alien warships. The Zorath had arrived, a ruthless and relentless alien species, and they had brought with them an overwhelming power. Serena still remembered the day they first attacked. The roar of their ships had drowned out the screams of her family. The fire, the explosions, everything had changed in an instant. She watched her world burn. She watched her parents and siblings fall, their faces twisted in pain. That day, she had lost everything. Every memory of warmth, love, and safety was swallowed by the cold, dark terror the Zorath brought. But Serena didn't die that day. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the stubbornness in her, the need to survive, or maybe it was just the fire that burned deep inside her. She had hidden in the wreckage alone, and she'd learned to survive. The aliens thought she was nothing, just one more human among many who had perished. But they couldn't have been more wrong. Serena was the silent one. She stayed hidden, unnoticed in the shadows, but that was her strength. In the beginning, survival was all that mattered. She scavenged for food and supplies, moving only when it was absolutely necessary, always keeping to the shadows. The Zorath ruled the cities now, and every day they hunted for any human that dared to resist. Serena knew better than to get caught. She had seen too many others fall, too many others who were too loud, too visible. She learned to be quiet, blending into the background, becoming a part of the ruins that surrounded her. The world had become her ghost, and she had become part of its silence. Each day felt like an eternity, and yet Serena remained. She stayed in the shadows, just out of reach, just out of sight. She moved like a whisper, like a shadow, her presence barely felt. It was almost as if she had become invisible. In those long, lonely days, the only sound she ever heard was the distant hum of alien ships overhead, patrolling for any sign of life. And though the world was full of monsters, both alien and human, Serena had learned not to fear the dark. It wasn't fear that kept her alive. It was the absence of it. Serena had once been a soldier. She had been trained to fight, to protect, to stand firm. But in this new world, the rules had changed. The fight wasn't about standing tall against the enemy. It wasn't about charging into battle with a weapon in hand. No, the fight now was about survival, about staying alive long enough to see the next day. Her life had become about patience. She would wait in the shadows, silent and still, letting the chaos pass her by. And when the time came, when the enemy's guard was down, she would strike. But only if necessary, only if it meant her survival. But deep down, she knew that her time was running out. There were only so many days a person could hide. The Zorath would eventually find her. They would eventually burn her city to the ground, searching for the last of the humans who dared to resist. But Serena wasn't ready to die. Not yet. She had lost too much. She had buried too many memories. And the one thing she had left, her will to survive, would not be taken from her without a fight. It was a cold night when the opportunity arrived. The Zorath had set up a new base on the outskirts of the city, gathering their forces for an attack. It was the perfect time to act. Serena knew this was the moment. She had studied the base for weeks, watching from the shadows, learning the patterns of the aliens. They were predictable, like all predators. They thought they were the apex species, above everything else in the universe. But Serena knew something they didn't. Even the strongest predators can be outwitted. Serena had spent years surviving on her own, relying on her mind more than her strength. She had learned to fight with her brain, not her fists, and that was what gave her the edge. The Zorath might be stronger, faster, more powerful, but they didn't have her cunning. They didn't have her ability to see the bigger picture, to understand that sometimes the quiet ones were the most dangerous. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Serena moved. She was dressed in tattered clothes, the same ones she had worn for months. They were covered in dirt, torn from the harsh environment she had been living in. But none of that mattered. In the shadows, her appearance didn't matter. Only her movements did. She moved like a shadow herself, slipping through the wreckage with ease. No sound, no disturbance, just silence. The base was just ahead. Serena crouched behind a pile of broken concrete, her eyes fixed on the guard towers in the distance. She could see the Zorath soldiers patrolling, their movements methodical, their weapons raised. But they were careless. They were too confident in their control over the planet. They didn't know the power that a single human could have when they learned to stay silent, when they learned to blend into the darkness. Serena watched as a group of soldiers passed by, their heavy boots crunching on the ground. She held her breath, not daring to make a sound. She knew that if one of them turned around, one of them looked in her direction, it would all be over. But they didn't. They walked on, oblivious to the danger that lay just a few feet away. The time had come. Serena moved quickly, darting toward the perimeter of the base, slipping through the cracks in the broken walls. The guards had no idea she was there. She was a ghost in their midst, unnoticed and unseen. She reached the entrance where a lone guard stood, oblivious to the world beyond his post. She didn't hesitate. With one swift movement, she knocked him out, dragging his unconscious body behind a nearby dumpster. She was inside. For the first time in years, Serena felt the thrill of purpose, the thrill of being more than just a shadow. She was a force now, a whisper in the wind, and she was ready to strike. Serena stood in the darkness, the base's cold, sterile walls looming in front of her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had come so far through the ruin, through the endless days of silence and waiting, and now she was inside the enemy's stronghold. It wasn't just the adrenaline coursing through her veins. It was the quiet certainty that this was her moment. For years, Serena had been surviving in the shadows, living in fear of the Zorath, trying to remain unnoticed, unheard. She had buried her emotions deep inside, not daring to feel anything. To survive meant to feel nothing. But now, as she looked at the base around her, she could feel the fire building inside her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. It was about showing the world, and the Zorath, that humans, though small in number, still had a power that couldn't be extinguished. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before moving forward. The corridors of the Zorath base were eerily quiet. The metallic walls reflected the dim light of her small flashlight as she crept along the edges of the hallway. Each step was calculated, each breath measured. She knew that one mistake could cost her everything. She couldn't afford to fail, not after all she had lost. The Zorath had come to Earth with their fleet of warships, destroying everything in their path. Cities had fallen in flames, families had been torn apart, and the human race had been reduced to a shadow of its former glory. The survivors, those who weren't already dead or enslaved, had retreated, hiding in the corners of the world, always a step ahead of the alien threat. But Serena knew that hiding could only last for so long. Sooner or later, the Zorath would find them. And Serena couldn't let that happen. Her heart sank as she passed a group of Zorath soldiers standing guard in the hallway. They were large, muscular beings, their reptilian features glowing in the light. They wore black armor, their eyes sharp and alert. The Zorath were not just conquerors, they were hunters, and the humans they hunted were prey. Serena knew that at any moment one of them could spot her and raise the alarm. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she pushed it aside. She had no choice but to keep moving. The plan had been simple in theory. Infiltrate the base. Find the apex core, the Zorath's ultimate weapon, and destroy it. But as Serena crept deeper into the heart of the base, she began to realize just how impossible the task truly was. The base was massive, with its sprawling hallways and towering walls. Every room, every corridor was guarded. She could hear the faint hum of machinery beneath her feet, the constant presence of the Zorath's control over every inch of the compound. It was an empire within an empire, and she was a tiny speck in its vastness. But Serena had something the Zorath didn't, the power of human ingenuity. She had learned long ago that the Zorath weren't invincible. They might be stronger, faster, and more technologically advanced, but they underestimated the one thing humans had always excelled at: adaptability. It was that adaptability, that will to survive, that Serena relied on now. She paused at a corner, peering around it. Ahead, a massive steel door loomed, its surface covered in intricate symbols and markings. She had reached the control room, the heart of the base. Beyond it, she knew, lay the apex core. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of wiping out entire cities with a single blast. The Zorath intended to use it to crush the last remaining resistance on Earth. If Serena could destroy it, the Zorath's plans would be foiled. But the stakes were higher than that. She wasn't just trying to stop the Zorath's weapon, she was fighting for her people, for her family, for every human who had ever been lost in this war. It was a personal mission, and failure was not an option. Taking a deep breath, Serena checked her weapon, a small, modified blaster she had scavenged from an abandoned outpost. It wasn't much, but it would do the job if she could get close enough. She had trained for this moment, spent years preparing for a chance like this. Now all she had to do was trust herself. She moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, her body pressed low to the ground. The guards outside the control room were talking in their strange, guttural language, their voices muffled by the walls. Serena's heart raced, her fingers trembling with anticipation. This was it. She was almost there. She glanced at the door. The control room was guarded by a single soldier, standing tall, his back to her. It would be easy to take him out. But the Zorath had a way of sensing things that didn't belong. A quiet noise, a subtle movement, and they would be on her like a pack of wolves. Serena knew she couldn't afford to make a sound. She crept closer, silent as a shadow. The guard didn't see her coming. With a swift motion, she knocked him out, her hands moving with practiced ease. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious but alive. Serena didn't waste any time. She dragged his body into the nearest storage closet and shut the door behind her. No noise, no sign of her presence. She stood in front of the steel door, her pulse pounding in her ears. The time to act was now. Serena pulled a small device from her belt, a hacking tool she had used in the past to disable Zorath security systems. She placed it against the door's control panel, and within moments the door slid open with a soft hiss. She slipped inside, her breath shallow, her muscles tense. The control room was dimly lit, with rows of monitors and consoles displaying data in an alien language. At the center of the room, surrounded by high-tech machinery, was the apex core, a massive, glowing sphere of energy, pulsing with raw power. Serena's eyes locked onto it. She knew what she had to do. But as she approached, a sense of unease settled over her. Something was wrong. The room felt too quiet, too empty, her instincts flared. Suddenly, a sharp noise broke the silence. The door behind her slammed shut, and Serena spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure stepped from the shadows, a Zorath officer tall and menacing, his glowing eyes fixed on her. "You're too late, human," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "You will never defeat us." Serena froze, but the fire inside her never wavered. She wasn't done yet, and she wasn't giving up. This fight was far from over. The Zorath officer's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. His presence seemed to fill the entire room, his glowing eyes staring down at Serena with cold contempt. He stood between her and the apex core, his body a solid wall of muscle and alien strength. His words were meant to break her spirit, to make her doubt the odds stacked against her. But Serena's resolve only grew stronger. "I'm not here to defeat you," she whispered, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. "I'm here to stop you." The officer's laugh was low and menacing. "Stop us, a lone human against the might of the Zorath?" He took a slow step toward her, his movements deliberate as though savoring the moment. "You're nothing but a shadow in the dark. Do you really think you can change anything?" Serena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The officer's arrogance only fueled the fire within her. She had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than words, and in that silence she found her strength. For a moment time seemed to slow. The officer advanced, his massive frame blocking the exit, but Serena's eyes were locked on the apex core. It was a beautiful, terrible thing, glowing with a strange energy, suspended in the heart of the room like a ticking time bomb. She had no time to waste. Her plan had always been to destroy the core. But now, with the officer standing in her way, the situation was more complicated than she had anticipated. She couldn't defeat him head-on. He was too strong, too fast. But Serena had never relied on strength alone. Her mind was her weapon. The officer took another step, and Serena moved. It wasn't fast or flashy. It wasn't a bold charge or a desperate attempt to overpower him. It was quiet, precise. She ducked low, weaving between the officer's massive legs, staying just out of his reach. He swung at her, his claws ripping through the air, but Serena was already gone, slipping back into the shadows of the room. The officer growled in frustration, spinning around to face her. "You think you can hide from me?" His voice was filled with fury now, his patience wearing thin. Serena's breath came in shallow gasps, but her mind was clear. She wasn't afraid. She had trained for moments like this. Every fight she'd survived, every day she'd spent hidden in the shadows had brought her to this point. She didn't need brute force. She needed strategy. And the Zorath officer was making a mistake, underestimating her. She reached into her pouch, pulling out a small device, a makeshift EMP grenade, one she had built herself from scavenged parts. It was her only chance to disable the officer's armor and get to the apex core. The device wasn't perfect, but it was her best shot. As the officer charged forward, Serena tossed the grenade. The officer's eyes widened in realization, but it was too late. The device detonated with a sharp, high-pitched sound, releasing a burst of electromagnetic energy. The officer staggered back, his armor flickering and sparking as the EMP disabled his systems. For a brief moment, he was vulnerable, his once impenetrable defense failing him. Serena wasted no time. She sprinted toward the apex core, her heart racing, her mind focused. She knew that the core was heavily guarded by the Zorath's advanced technology, but she also knew that she had studied it long enough to understand its weaknesses. The officer's distraction was her opening. She approached the core, her hands trembling with anticipation. The device was so close now, its energy pulsing in front of her like a living thing. She reached into her jacket, pulling out a small, compact explosive. It was a simple device, one that would be enough to cause a chain reaction that would destroy the core. But she had to be quick, time was running out. The officer would recover soon. Serena's fingers flew over the detonator, setting the timer to a perfect 15 seconds. She pressed the explosive against the core's surface, securing it in place with a swift motion. "Goodbye," she whispered, stepping back. But just as she turned to make her escape, the officer's voice thundered from behind her. "You can't run forever, human." Serena didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had done what she came to do. The Zorath officer's taunt was empty, his words meaningless now. The core was rigged, and it was only a matter of time before everything he fought for was destroyed. As she reached the door, the officer's roar echoed through the control room, but Serena didn't stop. She had learned the importance of being quiet, of being invisible, but she had also learned when to run. And now was that time. The hallway outside was eerily silent, the only sound the faint hum of the base's machinery. Serena's footsteps echoed in the emptiness as she sprinted toward the exit. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was focused. She could already feel the heat of the explosion building in her chest, the anticipation of the destruction that was moments away. She rounded a corner, heading toward the exit she had memorized from her previous scouting. The guards were still outside, but Serena was fast. The EMP grenade had taken care of their most advanced defenses, and the element of surprise was still on her side. She was so close, just a few more steps. But then a sound broke the silence. A loud, bone-rattling roar echoed from behind her. The officer was on his feet, his armor flickering back to life, his glowing eyes filled with rage. "Run, human," he bellowed. Serena's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't slow down. She had no choice now. She couldn't afford to be caught. She couldn't let the Zorath win. She bolted for the exit, her legs burning as she pushed herself faster. The officer's footsteps grew louder, closer. He was coming. But just as she reached the door, an explosion shook the ground beneath her feet. The entire base trembled as the apex core detonated, its energy releasing in a brilliant flash of light and sound. Serena felt the shockwave hit her, the force of it sending her stumbling forward. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The Zorath base erupted into chaos as the explosion spread through the corridors, its force ripping apart everything in its path. The officer's roar was drowned out by the roar of the blast. Serena knew she didn't have much time. She had to keep moving. She was almost there. The exit was just ahead. And then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of alien footsteps behind her. The officer was still coming. But Serena wasn't running from him anymore. She was running toward her victory. She wasn't just escaping anymore, she was fighting for the future. The blast echoed through the walls, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Zorath base. Serena felt the shockwave ripple through her body as she sprinted down the hallway, the heat of the explosion still lingering in the air. The ground beneath her feet vibrated with the force of the destruction she had caused, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The officer was still behind her, and his rage was only growing stronger. She had done it. The apex core had been destroyed. The Zorath's most powerful weapon was now nothing more than a heap of burning debris. But that wasn't enough. She couldn't allow herself to get caught now, not when she was so close to freedom, not when so many lives depended on this moment. Serena's lungs burned with each step, but she pushed through, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the officer's footsteps growing louder, faster. His armor had recovered from the EMP blast, and now he was moving like a predator, determined to catch his prey. "You can't escape." The officer's voice was filled with fury, his growl sending chills down Serena's spine. "You've destroyed everything, but you won't get away." Serena didn't slow down. She couldn't afford to. The exit was just ahead. She could see the faint outline of the door, the light beyond it beckoning her like a lifeline. But she knew she wouldn't make it if she didn't act fast. The officer was gaining on her, his massive form closing the gap with each passing second. Her mind raced. She had one chance, one moment to outsmart him, to turn the tables. Serena wasn't stronger than him, and she wasn't faster, but she had something the Zorath lacked, the will to survive. She reached the door and slammed her hand against the control panel. The door hissed open, but the moment she stepped through, she knew the officer wouldn't be far behind. The hallway outside was dark, lit only by the faint emergency lights flickering overhead. Serena's heart skipped a beat as she darted around a corner, praying she wasn't too late. A loud crash sounded from behind her, and Serena knew the officer was close. She didn't have time to think. She just had to keep moving. The base's layout was a maze, twisting corridors, narrow hallways, and hidden stairwells. Serena had memorized every inch of it during her days of watching, waiting, planning. But she had never anticipated being chased by the very creature she had come to outsmart. Her mind raced, her instincts on overdrive as she pushed herself faster. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs heavy with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. The officer was relentless. Every time she thought she had gained some distance, she heard his roar of anger, his heavy footsteps echoing closer. She rounded another corner only to come face to face with a dead end. Her heart dropped, panic rising in her chest. The officer was right behind her, and there was nowhere to run. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Serena's mind went blank, the sound of the officer's footsteps growing louder in her ears. This was it. She had fought so hard, come so far, but now, at the final moment, she was trapped. The officer's form emerged from the shadows, his towering figure blocking her escape. His glowing eyes gleamed with hatred as he raised his weapon, a menacing snarl twisting his lips. Serena could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had come all this way, faced impossible odds, and now she was going to die in this cold, forgotten corner of the Zorath base. But then something inside her stirred. It wasn't fear, it was fire. It was the same fire that had kept her alive when everything seemed hopeless. She had lost so much already, her family, her friends, her world. She wasn't about to lose herself too. Serena's eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that could help her. She spotted a small control panel on the wall beside her. It was the emergency override for the base's lockdown system. If she could activate it, she could seal the base, trapping the officer inside. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance she had. With a burst of energy, Serena sprinted toward the control panel. The officer snarled and lunged at her, but Serena was faster. She slammed her fist into the panel, her mind focused entirely on the buttons in front of her. "No," the officer roared, his voice filled with rage as he realized what she was doing. But it was too late. The control panel lit up, and the sound of heavy metal doors slamming shut echoed through the corridor. The officer's growl of frustration was the last thing Serena heard before the room was sealed. She had done it, she had outsmarted him. The air around her felt suddenly still, the silence almost deafening. Serena stood there, panting, her body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. She had faced the impossible and survived. The Zorath officer was trapped, his rage locked away behind the reinforced walls of the base. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Serena allowed herself a brief moment of relief. But the battle wasn't over. The Zorath were still out there, still hunting. This victory, while sweet, was only one step in a much larger war. Serena knew that the destruction of the Apex Core was just the beginning. There were still countless battles to fight, still lives to save, still hope to restore. As she turned to face the exit, Serena felt a new strength building within her. The fire inside her burned brighter than ever before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting for something bigger, for all the humans who had been lost, for the world that still had a chance. Serena stepped forward, the doors of the base opening before her like a gateway to a new beginning. She had faced the impossible and lived to tell the tale. And with that, she knew there was no enemy too great, no predator too powerful that she couldn't defeat. She was the storm that would change everything. The Zorath base lay in ruins behind her, the once imposing structure now a shell of its former self. Serena didn't stop to look back, though she could hear the distant sound of the chaos she had caused. The explosion of the Apex Core had sent shockwaves through the entire facility, and the destruction was already starting to ripple through the Zorath's fleet above. But for Serena, there was no time to celebrate, no time to dwell on the victory that had come at such a great cost. Her legs burned with exhaustion, her breath shallow as she ran through the broken streets. The blast had disrupted everything, and now was the time to move. She couldn't let herself be caught again. Not now, not when she was so close. The world outside was dark, the ruins of the city stretching out before her like a wasteland. There were no sounds of life, only the echoes of a world that had been ravaged. The air was thick with dust and smoke, remnants of the Zorath's destruction. But Serena kept moving, her eyes scanning the horizon as she pushed forward. There was a faint glimmer of light ahead. She knew the human resistance was close. That was her goal now, to join them to fight alongside the last of Earth's survivors. But she also knew that she couldn't do it alone. Her thoughts raced as she moved, but there was a constant thread that kept pulling her forward, the faces of her family. Her mother's smile, her father's laugh, the warmth of their home before everything changed. She hadn't thought about them in years, couldn't afford to, really. But now their faces flooded her mind, reminding her why she kept going, why she had to keep fighting. She had lost so much already, too much, and she wasn't going to let the Zorath take any more. Serena stopped to catch her breath behind a crumbling wall, the soft sounds of her heartbeat filling her ears. Her legs trembled beneath her, and her stomach ached from the hunger she hadn't been able to feed for days. But she knew she couldn't rest for long, not yet. As she pressed her back against the wall, a rustling sound caught her attention. She froze, her body instinctively going still. The Zorath were never far behind. They were relentless, hunters by nature, always searching, always watching. But this wasn't the sound of alien footsteps. This was different. Serena slowly leaned around the corner, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't see anything, but she could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps moving closer. Her body tensed, preparing for the worst, but she didn't draw her weapon. Not yet. She had learned to rely on more than just her blaster. She was still, like a shadow in the night, waiting for the right moment. Then from the darkness, a figure appeared. It was another human. A man, his clothes torn and dirty, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. He looked just as exhausted as Serena felt, but there was something in his eyes, something that mirrored the fire she had inside her. The man stopped when he saw her, his body tensing as if ready to fight. But Serena didn't move. She didn't reach for her weapon. She couldn't afford to waste energy on fear. Instead, she simply nodded, her gaze meeting his. "I'm not here to fight," she said, her voice raspy from exhaustion. The man looked at her for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face. Then slowly he lowered his stance, lowering his weapon. He was a soldier, she could tell by the way he held himself. He had fought like her. But now there was a kind of weariness in his eyes, a recognition of the same fight they were both in. "I wasn't sure if anyone else made it out," the man said, his voice rough like he hadn't spoken in days. "Are you from the Resistance?" Serena nodded. "I'm trying to find them. Are you with them?" The man shook his head, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "I wish. I've been alone for too long. The Resistance scattered after the Zorath hit the base, but I'm still alive and I'll keep fighting." Serena felt a sudden rush of relief. She wasn't alone. There were others. There were survivors. She had to get to them. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm but with a trace of something softer, a shared understanding. "We can't waste time. They'll come looking for us." The man nodded. Together they moved through the darkened streets, their steps light but swift, their eyes constantly searching for signs of danger. They didn't speak much. There was no need. Serena's silence, the quiet that had kept her alive, was her strength. She didn't need words to tell him what she needed. They were both survivors now, and they understood what that meant. As they moved deeper into the city, Serena's thoughts returned to the officer she had left behind. She didn't know if he was dead or alive, but it didn't matter. The Zorath were a threat to everyone, and the fight against them was far from over. She had done what she could, but now the real battle was about to begin. There was a war to finish. But in that moment, as they moved through the ruins, Serena couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside her. The fight wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting for something bigger than herself. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, about restoring the hope that had been lost. And in the man walking beside her, Serena felt the spark of something else, something human, something she hadn't felt in so long. She wasn't alone anymore. Her silence had always been her shield, her way of staying hidden, of surviving. But now, as she walked with someone who shared her pain, her hope, she realized that maybe, just maybe, silence wasn't all there was. There was power in stillness, yes, but there was also strength in unity. Together they would fight. Together they would take back what was theirs. The Zorath had underestimated humanity, and Serena would make sure they paid for that mistake. The city was silent, save for the soft echo of their footsteps against the crumbling ground. Serena walked side by side with the stranger whose name she still didn't know. His silence mirrored hers, and the air between them was filled with the weight of shared loss. They were no longer strangers, but two souls bound by the same fight, the same desperate need to survive. The world around them had become a wasteland, a battleground where hope seemed as fragile as the walls that still stood. But despite the devastation, Serena couldn't help but feel a spark of something, a sense of purpose, perhaps. It wasn't just about running or hiding anymore. It was about standing up, about fighting for something that mattered. And for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. They moved through the ruins, following the narrow streets that led toward the Resistance's last known location. The faint light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting long shadows across the broken buildings. The air was still, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "Do you think they're still there?" the stranger asked, his voice breaking the silence. His tone was careful, as if afraid to hope. "I don't know," Serena replied, her voice steady. "But we can't stop looking, not now." The man nodded, though his expression was tight with doubt. Serena understood. She had seen too many places fall, too many people disappear without a trace. The Zorath were relentless. Once they set their sights on something, they didn't stop until it was destroyed. But Serena had learned not to give in to despair. There was always a chance, always a fight left to be fought. They reached an abandoned building that the Resistance had used as a safe house in the past. The door was broken, its hinges rusted from years of neglect, but it still opened with a groan. Inside, the room was empty, the once bustling headquarters now nothing but a hollow shell. The walls were scarred with marks of battle, and the remnants of old equipment lay scattered across the floor. It felt like a ghost town, a place where memories of what had been lived and died. Serena stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. She had hoped to find something, anything, that would lead her to the others, but the place was eerily quiet. The faint sound of distant explosions and the hum of alien ships overhead reminded her that the world outside hadn't stopped. The Zorath were still out there, still hunting. She turned to the man. "We need to keep moving. If they're not here, they could be elsewhere." He didn't argue. They had both learned the same hard truth. Hope wasn't something you waited for. It was something you fought for. And right now, that fight meant finding the others, finding anyone who could help them turn the tide. They stepped back into the street, their eyes alert, their movements careful. The world had become a dangerous place, but it was one they knew how to navigate. Serena had spent too many years surviving on her own to let fear control her now. She had a mission, and it was bigger than her, bigger than both of them. As they moved forward, the man spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I've been alone for so long, I don't know what to believe anymore." Serena glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I understand," she said quietly. "I've been alone too, but we can't let that break us. The Zorath might have taken everything from us, but they can't take our will to fight. As long as we're breathing, we keep going." The man nodded, his shoulders slightly relaxing. For the first time, Serena saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something more than just survival. It was determination. It was hope. They walked for what felt like hours, the sun rising higher in the sky as they made their way through the war-torn city. The streets were empty, the silence almost oppressive. Every corner they turned, every alley they passed, held the ghosts of a life that had been destroyed. And yet they pressed on. Finally, just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the ruins, they found something. A small group of survivors huddled together in the remains of a collapsed building. They looked just as tired, just as broken as Serena and the stranger felt. But when they saw Serena, something in their eyes changed. A spark of recognition, a glimmer of relief. One of them, an older woman with graying hair and worn clothes, stepped forward. "You made it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We thought we were the last ones." Serena felt a lump rise in her throat. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "We need to keep fighting. We need to take back what's ours." The woman nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "We're with you. We've been hiding, surviving, but it's time to stand up." Serena looked around at the small group of survivors. They weren't soldiers, they weren't warriors, but they were humans, and that made them powerful. The Zorath might have underestimated them, but Serena knew better. It was never about strength alone. It was about the will to fight, the belief that even in the darkest moments, there was a way out. Together they planned, they strategized, and as the night wore on, the old fire in Serena's chest burned brighter than ever. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. They would fight for every inch of ground they had left. They would fight for the world they had lost. By the time the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Serena knew they were ready. They would no longer be the hunted. They would be the hunters. They would take the fight to the Zorath, and they would show them that no matter how powerful an enemy seemed, they could always be defeated. And in that moment, Serena realized something. She had spent so many years in the shadows, hiding from the world. But now she was done hiding. The world had taken everything from her, but it hadn't taken her will. And that was something the Zorath could never take. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated humanity. And now it was time to make them pay. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the war-torn landscape. Serena stood at the edge of the makeshift camp, watching the horizon with a sense of resolve. It had been weeks since she'd joined the small group of survivors, and every day had brought new challenges. But now they were ready. The resistance was small, but their spirits were strong. They had a plan, and they were going to execute it. As Serena looked around at the people gathered around the campfire, she saw hope in their eyes. These were not warriors or seasoned soldiers. They were survivors. They had lived through hell, and they had found strength in each other. They had found strength in the fight. The older woman, whom Serena had met the day she arrived, came up to her. Her name was Maria, and she had quickly become a pillar of the group. Maria placed a hand on Serena's shoulder, her eyes soft but filled with fire. "We're with you, Serena," Maria said, her voice low but firm. "We're ready to take back what's ours." Serena nodded, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "We've been running, hiding, surviving, but today we take a stand. Today we fight back." As the group gathered around, Serena outlined the plan. They had spent days gathering information, watching the Zorath patrols and learning the patterns of their movements. The Zorath were still confident, too confident. They thought they had won, but Serena knew better. There were always cracks in the armor. There were always openings. Their target was one of the Zorath's key supply lines, an armored convoy carrying vital resources. If they could intercept it, they could cripple the enemy's operations and send a clear message. Earth was not done fighting. The Zorath would learn that humanity was more than just survivors. They were fighters. The group didn't have much, just a few weapons, homemade explosives, and their determination. But Serena had learned something over the past few weeks. The Zorath had underestimated them, and it was time to make them regret that. As they moved out under the cover of darkness, Serena's heart raced. The plan was simple: attack the convoy, destroy the supplies, and retreat before the Zorath could send reinforcements. It was risky, but it was their best shot. The night was cold, and the streets were eerily silent as the group moved through the ruins of the city. Serena led them, her senses on high alert, every step calculated. She could feel the tension in the air, the kind of tension that came right before everything changed. They were no longer on the defensive. They were on the offensive. The convoy appeared just as planned. It was a large one, guarded by several Zorath soldiers. Serena's eyes narrowed as she studied their movements. The soldiers were complacent, too focused on their mission to notice the danger closing in on them. It was a perfect opportunity. The survivors scattered, taking their positions in the shadows, waiting for the signal. Serena gave one last look to the group: Maria, the man whose name she still didn't know, and the others who had put their trust in her. She nodded once, and the attack began. There was no time for fear. There was no time for hesitation. Serena's heart pounded as she ran toward the convoy, her footsteps swift and silent. She reached the nearest soldier and with a single motion took him out. The rest of the group followed, their movements coordinated and precise. They had trained for this moment, and it showed. They moved like a single unit, each person knowing their role, working together as one. The Zorath soldiers scrambled, their shouts echoing through the night, but it was too late. The survivors were already inside their perimeter. Explosives went off, sending a shower of sparks and debris into the air. The convoy's guards fell one by one, unable to react in time. Serena was in the thick of it now, her heart pounding but her mind calm. She moved with purpose, disabling Zorath equipment, planting charges, and ensuring the convoy couldn't be salvaged. The fire inside her burned brighter than ever. This was the moment. This was the fight they had been waiting for. But just as they were about to finish, the sound of reinforcements reached her ears. More Zorath soldiers were arriving, and the survivors couldn't hold out much longer. Serena's eyes darted to Maria, who was keeping the rest of the group in check. They needed to retreat, and fast. "Get out," Serena shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We've done what we came for, fall back." But the Zorath weren't going to let them escape easily. Serena could see their reinforcements closing in, their weapons aimed and ready to fire. She could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't going to be a simple victory. This was a battle they had to win, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever suffered under the Zorath's rule. Go, Maria yelled, pushing the others forward. Now. The group sprinted toward the alleyways, moving as quickly as they could. But Serena stayed behind for a moment longer, making sure the last charge was set and ready. The Zorath were closing in, but she couldn't let them stop them now. With one last look at the convoy, Serena ran. The blast behind her shook the ground, a deafening explosion that sent a shockwave through the air. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She had done what needed to be done. The Zorath would know that humanity wasn't done yet. The survivors made their way through the ruins, the sounds of the explosion still ringing in their ears. They were out of danger, at least for now, but Serena knew that this victory was just one step in a much larger fight. The Zorath would come for them, but they had made a statement. They had shown the Zorath that humans weren't weak, they weren't afraid. And as Serena looked around at the people beside her, people who had risked everything to fight for their future, she knew that they would never stop fighting. The Zorath might have thought they could destroy humanity, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the human spirit. Serena had fought for her family, for her home, for the world she had lost. And now she would fight for the future, for the generations to come. Humanity would rise again.